Now, 2 months after a Chinese jet crashed into a mountain, killing all 132 people who were on board, the probe into the incident suggests that the crash was intentional. As per U.S. officials' preliminary assessment, data recovered from the black box suggests that controls pushed the plane into the fatal dive. The role of the pilot is under scanner, though officials won't rule out the possibility of someone barging into the cockpit and intentionally causing the crash. I'm now joined by my colleague Maha Siddiqi. She is also our foreign affairs editor. Maha, we've just received some pretty big breaking news about the incident that took place on March 21st. And this is pretty alarming because now the probe details are saying that this nosedive was intentional. Could you give us any more details on this?
Yes, it's an absolutely shocking revelation that is coming through. And the Wall Street Journal has put out this report speaking with sources. These are U.S. investigators who were involved in the probe. Remember, this is primarily being probed by the Chinese authorities, but because Boeing 737-800 is a U.S. model, and therefore the U.S. officials were also involved in this entire investigation. And from what they have discovered from the black box that was recovered from the debris, the wreckage of this plane, they believe that there was some instruction given to the pilot to drop down 20,000 feet suddenly, which led to the crash, ultimately killing 132 people. This plane was near the city of Guangxi province, where in the city of Guju in Guangxi province, and the Chinese investigators have also not pointed any finger at any technical fault. So while the Boeing MAX was under the scanner, because remember, Aayesha, way back in 2017, 2018, there were reports of the Boeing MAX having a trouble, and therefore because of that there were 2 accidents that were reported. It was later grounded. But Boeing 737-800 has been in service around the world for a very long time, and therefore aviation experts believe that it could not have been a technical fault with the aircraft. And that is what has been pointed out, because even the Chinese investigators have pointed out over here, Chinese authorities have not indicated to their U.S. counterparts who were part of this probe that there was any mechanical or flight control problem that they saw in this aircraft. So certainly now this almost suggests a sabotage, that there is a possibility that the pilot was given instructions which led to the crash. So far, the Wall Street Journal report is not talking about the possibility of anybody entering the cockpit, but as you're pointing out, that there are some other reports that are suggesting that they can't at this stage rule out whether anybody barged into the cockpit as well.
Absolutely, Maha. Now, I request that you stay with us, because right now we're going to take a look at the details that have emerged from this probe into the crash that took place on March 21st. Now, remember, this is the worst air crash that has taken place with a Chinese aircraft in the last 3 decades. Now, the first damning revelation is that somebody in the cockpit intentionally crashed the plane and ordered that nosedive to happen. The second revelation that we're going to take a look at is that the black box data hints at the plane being pushed into the fatal dive. Now remember, 132 people died in this crash. 123 members of those were passengers, while 9 of them were aircraft members. Now, no mechanical or flight control issues have been identified so far. And the next revelation that we're going to be taking a look at is that the role of the plane's pilot is also under the scanner. Now remember, this pilot is not alive. Everybody who was in this crash passed away after the fatal nosedive. Now, what's also being looked at is the possibility of a deliberate act by an outsider. Now remember, as we've mentioned, it's being noted that it's possible that somebody barged into the cockpit and made the plane go into a fatal nosedive. Now I'm heading back over to my colleague and foreign affairs editor Maha Siddiqi to give us more details on this. Maha, you were mentioning that there were 2 separate probes going on, one by U.S. officials, one by Chinese officials. Could you give us a little more detail on what the status is of the Chinese probe?
So the Chinese authorities have not commented so far beyond saying anything about the crash last month, where they said that the investigations were still on. So once this report is out today, we should possibly expect some reaction from the Chinese side as to whether they believe that this report could be correct or not. Because what is being stated here is that the black box which has been recovered from the wreckage of the flight has revealed that there was a conversation which led the pilot to drop this aircraft down 20,000 feet within a minute. That led to the crash ultimately. And therefore, what they are suggesting is that this was not a technical or a mechanical failure on the 737-800 Boeing, but rather this was a specific instruction given to the pilot. And therefore, it does appear to be at the moment a sabotage. Now, primarily because this was a China Eastern flight, as I pointed out, this probe was being led by the Chinese authorities. But because Boeing 737-800 is a US-made aircraft, that is why US authorities were involved in the investigation. And as I also pointed out, Aayesha, earlier, a Boeing 737-800 has been in service for long. There haven't been any complaints as opposed to Boeing MAX, which was grounded because of incidents of accidents in 2018-2019. So it was pretty baffling for the investigators. Also, the Chinese Eastern, in its own investigation with regards to the pilot and the co-pilot, this is what the report suggests, is that they have said that both of them were in good health. They do not seem to have had any financial or family issues. Because in the past, we have seen that in one case of an accident of an airline, it did appear that the mental health of the pilots and the co-pilots was certainly very important. And mental health is given a lot of priority as far as mental and physical health of the person who is helming the flight, that is the pilot and the co-pilot. In this case, when they did a background check after the crash of the flight, they were given to believe that they were in absolute good health. They did not have any mental or emotional issues that could have led them to create any sort of a fatality on their own. So now it appears that the fatality here, the casualty, the crash was created by possibly, and I'm using the word possibly here because we have not heard anything from the Chinese side on it yet, by a third person. Now, the black box suggests a conversation of another person giving an instruction to drop down the aircraft by 20,000 feet. This is certainly very alarming. And we will wait to see today what the Chinese authorities say.
Okay, Maha, thank you for those details. I request that you stay with us as we're now being joined by Major General A.K. Savaj, who is a defense expert. General, thank you so much for joining us. But we are breaking some big news right now about the crash that took place on March 21st, about how this might have actually been intentional. Could you please give us your input on this?
Absolutely, guys. See, this is a very shocking news in case it is now been mentioned that this crash was intentional. This needs to further investigate it because it is easy said than done, because what can be the reason? Why was it intentional? Who has benefited by doing what he has done it? So this needs the investigation, and very rightly Maya said, the Chinese have not reacted so far. The black box is hinting toward that. But this required to have a more investigation. What are the reasons, why it was done, and who gets benefit? What do they want to drive out of this? So it is a very strange case. If in case the crash of a civil aircraft is intentional, but this are all in the preliminary stage. This needs the investigation. You can't believe until next is proved that this has happened intentionally.
Absolutely, General.